Hello everyone. Thanks for joining my session. Before we start, I really want to thank our data platform team to giving me the opportunity to share my experience in this session with you guys. Before we start, I'm just going to talk about what this session is all about. We're going to look into calculation groups, when and where to use calculation groups, and what are the certain things we should be taking care of when we are using calculation groups, because that can lead to some problems in our solutions later on. Before spending too much time, let's get into this, and it's going to be a lot more of a hands-on development and then very few slides. So our agenda for this particular session is going to be what is calculation groups, when to use these calculation groups, and what are the best practices and pitfalls we should follow, or pitfalls we should design in a way that we don't get into challenges, and where we should go to learn more. And we will go through all those points. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Parv Chana. People also call me Parv Chana. I'm a BI architect and consultant. I run my own consulting company here in Vancouver, Canada, a beautiful city. Love it. And I'm enjoying Power BI. I'm doing Power BI since it was made available. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube channel which I started on January 1st, 2022. I think I'm almost a shy of 125 videos posted on my YouTube channel. Do subscribe and check out the videos on my YouTube channels. It's a little bit different than the regular YouTube channels. I'm talking more about the business problems and discussing those and walking through how to solve those. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. This is my 4th year. I'm lucky to be a MVP. And I'm also very active on Power BI community, where I'm a Power BI super user as well. Let's get into our today's session. So first, what is calculation groups? So calculation groups is basically when you develop a calculation group, it's a table with a single column in it. Actually, there are 2 columns, but one column is hidden. You can unhide it. That's by default. It starts with the 2 columns, and the one column is the name of the column you give when you develop the calculation groups, and the other column is ordinal, which is basically a sort order, how you want to sort the calculation items. Calculation items are the records in a calculation groups in the table. Each calculation item you create in a calculation group becomes a record in that particular table, and the ordinal is allows you to sort your calculation items the way you want it to be. By default, the sort order for calculation item is the way that you when you create the calculation item. So it's that sort order. But if you want to define your own sort order, you can actually change. Let's say a calculation item is called sales, and other is called hours, and H is before S. Let's say that's the default sort order. But if you want sales to be before hours or some other way you want to sort it, you can actually give the ordinal value and change the ordinal value to define your own sort orders. The calculation groups DAX functions. There are certain DAX functions which are designed mainly for calculation groups. Those are like a selected measure, selected selected measure name. Then there is a selected measure format string. There are 4 or 5 different DAX functions which are designed to work with the calculation groups. We will look into these functions in our demo. So again, this is a table which has a special property, and that's what makes it calculation groups. As of today, if you really want to create a calculation group, there is no way in Power BI desktop. You have to use third-party tool. In our example, we're going to use Tabular Editor. I have a Tabular Editor 2 and 3. For this demo purposes, we're going to use Tabular Editor 2. Tabular Editor 2 is a free tool. Do download it and then use it. And so that's the way you can create the calculation groups in your model. in Power BI desktop, there is no way to develop a calculation groups. So I just want to make sure that you are aware of that. So now the question comes, why should I use calculation groups? Um, the first thing is the reusable calculations. So very simple example for that is quickly, if we talk about time intelligence, let's say we have a month to date, quarter to date, and year to date, simple stuff. And we have a sales measure and the quantity measures. As of today, if we really want to, without calculation groups, if we really wanted to create a month to date, quarter date, year to date for sales, it means we have to create a three measures, which will use a month to date, quarter date, year to date for sales measure. And similarly, if we have to do it for quantity, we have to create three more measures for the quantity. And let's say if there's a number of orders, we have to do it for number of orders as well. So basically, any measure on which we want to apply this time intelligent function, we have to create those many measures. But this is where the calculation group shines. Basically, your month to date logic is still the same. Doesn't matter whether it's a sales or you're applying on a sales measure or a quantity or number of orders or discount or freight, you name it. The core recalculation is still the same. And that is one of the reasons why you will use the calculation group. So anything, any logic, any business logic you want to apply on a multiple measures, so the calculation groups is your way to achieve that, rather than creating a measure for each and every base measure. Other thing is changing relationship. In a typical example, for example, we have a sales order table and it's connected to the date table. Sales order table, for example, we have a three different dates: due date, sales date, order date. And let's say we will have to calculate the month to date by order date, and also month to date by due date, and month to date by ship date, on sales and on quantity. In this case, we will have a month to date for sales, by order date, by ship date, by let's say due date. So it's already three measures just for a month to date for sales. And similarly, if we have to do it for quantity, it will be three more. And then if we add a quarter date and year to date, there's tons of measures all of a sudden. So what we can do is, when we want to change the relationship, again, it's a reusable thing, that we want to, let's say, instead of order date, which has an active relationship, we want to use the ship date. Instead of creating a separate measure for that, using the user relationship function, we can create a calculation group which can switch between one relationship to the another one. So it doesn't matter whether we are using a sales measure, sum of sales, or the quantity, we can still use a calculation group to switch between the active relation to, or make inactive relationship active. So that's a great use case where you will use calculation groups. Dynamic format string. This is really important. There is no way in Power BI except calculation groups that you can really create a different formatted string for the same measure. The typical example for this is, if you're really seeing the sales by country, and let's say you want to put the currency symbol for the sales based on the country you are looking at. Right now there is no way. Currently, if you do it in Power BI with the DAX, you will convert your measure into a string to concatenate with the currency symbol. But with calculation group, and you can define your own format string, and you can have your own logic, whatever the way you want. It makes it very powerful. So this could be the one of the reason why you want to look into calculation groups and use it. And again, the selection and switching between measures. Basically, you are giving the power to the user that if you have created, let's say, a sales by month or by year, and you want to give the opportunity to the user, whether they want to see the sales or the quantity or number of orders or whatever. So you put a slicer using the calculation group, calculation items on the slicer, and let the user switch between the measures the way they want to see the data and what they want to see, instead of predefining the visuals and then creating multiple visuals. Like there's a sales showing the sales by month, and then showing the sales by quantity, and then showing the sales, it's showing the quantity by month, showing the sales by month, and other measures as well. So you can really switch between the different measures, and users can um, uh, change and tweak the whatever is important to them to see in the reports. We will go through all this in our demo. So these are the three or four things where you really, there are many other reasons you will use calculation groups, but these are the four top things in my list of items when I think it's a time to use the calculation groups. So let's look into all this into Power BI desktop and go one by one and discover further into calculation groups. All right, so here in we are in Power BI. Just before I start talking about calculation groups, let's look at the model first. So pretty straightforward model. Don't want to go too deep into the model, but just to, for the purpose of demo, we have a sales table, and then which is of course fact table, and then a calendar table which has three dates in the sales table and have a relationship with the calendar table. Of course, one, when you have a multiple relationship between two tables, only one relationship can be active. In this case, the relationship between the sales and the calendar table is activate on based on the order date and the date, but other two relationships are inactive. And then we have a product and customer and some other dimension table. So the important part which I wanted to show here is the relationship between the calendar and the sales table, that how we can take advantage of calculation groups to change between the inactive relationship and the active relationships. So going on to the visualization here. So what I have here is a uh, showing sales quantity and order count by year, and of course drill down into quarter and in the month. So now at this point of time, let's say if this was not a matrix visual, and if we switch this to a line chart, for example, and now what we have is we have a order count, quantity, and the sales, and all seeing all these three things does not make sense because the volume of the sales and the order count is totally different things. Um, so what about if we want to give the user the opportunity what they wanted to see, how we can achieve that? And this is where the calculation groups shines. And let's switch it back to matrix visual because it's easy to explain things in matrix visual. So I'm going to go back in matrix visual. So as I said, to create a calculation group, you need to go to external tool. In this case, we're going to use the tabular editor. I already have it opened. Here it is. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new calculation group. So what the use case of this calculation group is allow user to select what they wanted to see in the visual. So let's quickly create one. So if you go and create, right click on tables and then create new and calculation groups. I'm going to call it select a metric. So once you create a calculation group, as I said, the calculation group is a table. So select a metric will become a table in our model. And by default, it has two columns. One is name and the ordinal. As I said, it's hidden. That is to sort the, how you want to sort the calculation items. So if I rename this name, that becomes the column in the table. So let's rename it, call it also the same as select a metric. So this is a column name, and now we can add the calculation items. So what we want the user to select, we want the user to pick and choose what they want to see. They want to see sales, quantity, or number of orders, or all of them. So that's the first calculation item is called sales. So calculation item becomes a record in the calculation group table. So I will show you actually in once we apply this. So what this calculation item is supposed to do when we create this calculation, it should return a measure, a calculation. You cannot save it without applying any calculation. So we know our sales calculation item should return the sales measure. Sales measure is simply a sum of sales. I can either write here sum and whatever DAX expression I want to do it. Since my sales measure is already there, which is a sum of sales, I'm just gonna return that sales measure. So that's first thing. And let's add a new calculation item, call it quantity. Again, we can call it anything. So I have another measure in my model called quantity, which is simple sum of quantity from our orders table, and that's what it is. So then the third one we're going to add is number of orders. Let's call number of orders, and I think the measure is called, let's go to the sales table, and it is called order count. If I go there, and as you can see, this is the expression in that measure, so it's order count. So here I'm calling it number of orders, but I'm going to return the measure called order count. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so we're going to save the changes. So let's save it. Now, once you create a calculation group, of course, now Power BI is asking to refresh the model. So we're going to click refresh now. Now that table will show up in the side here, and we call it a select a metric. So let's see that table exists here. Here you go. So it's called select a metrics. Let's take a quick look at this table, select a metric. So as you can see, there is a a column called select a metric in a select a metric table with the 3 records in it: sales, quantity, and number of orders. By default, if we don't give the sort order, the ordinal value is -1. So it's basically the way it is being sorted. It's just going to show that natural order. But if we really want to give our own order, we can always do that, and I will show you that. So now, to how we make use of this, so we can then what we can do is, currently what we doing in our metrics visual, we have a year hierarchy on the rows, and what we have all 3 measures: sales, quantity, and order count on our value section. So what we can do is, it does not matter, we can keep one measure here, but in the columns we're going to use the calculation, a column from the calculation group we just created, and that's a select a metric. We're going to put this on here on the columns, and here you go. So we have a number of orders, quantity, and sales. Now this shows, and they are returning the respective value. Now, as you probably looked into this, everything is showing as a dollar. Even the number of orders is supposed to be a number, and quantity is supposed to be a number without dollar sign, and sales is supposed to be dollar. Why it is showing the dollar sign? Because in the values we are using the sales measure, and the format string for the sales measure is a currency. Let's say if I change quantity, which is my measure, and put that on my value section and remove the sales one. So everything is now without the dollar sign, and then the sales is also without the dollar sign. So the format string by default, it is taking from the measure which we are using on the value section. So now that's not what we want. What we want is we want to see the sales in the dollar and the quantity and the number of orders in the number. So how we can do that? Let's try to do two things. So sales, we should bring the sales first, quantity and number of orders at the third, and also change the format string for this. So go back to calculation groups. So here in each calculation item, let's first make a sort order. So we want the sales to be first. We can drag and drop on the top, and that will force, okay, or maybe change it to, it's just the interface. So sales is supposed to be 0. Quantity is, now as you can see, the ordinal value for quantity is 1 and the number of order is 2. You can drag and drop as well, but I don't want to spend time on doing that. So sales now 0, ordinal value 0 and 1 and 2. So what we can do is, when we are in the sales, we given what measure this calculation item is supposed to return, then there is an opportunity what should be the format string for this particular calculation item. So here I can define that I want it to be whatever the format string I want. I can define here. I want it to be, you have to put this in the quotes, and then this is like dollar, and then this is what I want it to be. You can actually also go in here in property and the format string expression. You can enter it. You can write really a complex DAX logic. There are tons of video on that, and change the format string the way you want it. And for quantity, what we want is we just don't want anything. We want no decimal places, so with the comma separated, and the same for the number of orders. So let's go to format string expression, all this stuff. Once this is done, we have to apply the changes. So these changes is now went back to Power BI. Let's go back here, refresh now. So here you go. Now sales is the first. As you can see, the ordinal value has forced the how we want to sort it, and then the quantity and the number of orders. And as you can see, now sales is showing as a dollar sign, quantity and number of orders. So doesn't matter what measure I use on my value section of the matrix visual, or as a matter of fact any visual, it will contain the same format string, and it will work. Now we did this, we already had this before. What's the point of doing that? Now here is the beauty. What we can do is from our select a measure, which we create, select a metric actually, we can use that as our slicer. Now if we use this as a slicer, what up to the user, if they're really interested in seeing only sales, they can click the sales, and this matrix visual is now only showing sales. And if I want to see quantity, I can see only quantity. I don't need to see anything else. And if I really want to see sales and quantity, I can pick and choose what I wanted to see. So first of all, now we're giving the user the flexibility to, with calculation items, choose what you want to see. And we given our own formats, we provided the format string. So those were the two things in the list that where it gives user the power what they want to see. Now other part of this was the reusable functions. So let's say I wanted to use month to date, quarter to date, and year to date as well. So the one way could be that if let's say if we have to before calculation groups, if we have to do this, so we have to create 3 measures for sales, 3 for quantity, and 3 for number of orders, month to date, quarter to date, and year to date. So that would be 9 measures, and we have 3 different time relationships, as you can see in the here. And if we really have to do it for the each particular date, ship date, due date, and order date, it's a 9 measures already multiplied by 3 more, so there will be 27 different measures to manage this whole thing. But with calculation groups, we still have only 3 measures fundamentally, which is sum of sales, sum of quantity, and the distinct count of the orders, and that's going to drive everything. So I already created a calculation group to pick and choose which date we want to use. So let me show you quickly that. So for example, if I really wanted to select, I call it select a date measure, and the column name I also gave a selected date. So what I did is, if I pick the due date, what I'm doing is, so here comes our selected measure function. So as I said, so what does this, we are telling it is whatever the measure has been selected. What does that means is, if we're looking in the visual, whatever the measure has been selected in the visual, use that measure and apply my logic on that. And my logic in this case is user relationship. So user relationship is a function to switch between inactive relation and make it active. So I'm saying if I am using the due date, then use the due date relationship and apply it on whatever the measure we are seeing on the visual. And similarly with the order date. So in order date case, I'm just returning the selected measure. The reason behind that is because that is the active relationship and I don't need to do anything. And for ship date, I'm switching the measure to ship date. So now let's put this in the visual here. So let's say if I'm seeing, I'm going to choose the sales as my measure, and I'm going to call bring that select a date as my that's my another calculation group, and put this on top of my columns in my matrix visual. So here you go. So what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing the sales which because that's the measure metric I selected. By due date, by order date, and by ship date. I can now see quantity, by due date, by order date, by ship date. So, and I can also use this as my measure, sorry, as a slicer. So I can pick and choose, hey, I want to see the order date and I want to see sales, quantity, and number of orders. So actually I have to drill down to the next level. So now I can, not on the rows, but on the columns, because so now I'm seeing the order sales by order date, and quantity by order date and number of orders. So I can pick the ship date as well. So now here I'm seeing, let's maximize it. So what is the sales by order date, what is the sales by ship date? If I really want to see all these together, I can switch the order of selected metric on top and then that selected date. So let's drill down to the next level. Here you go. So now I have a sales by order date, what is due in Q4, what is in the what is the sales by ship date on that particular month. As you can see, the numbers are different. Similarly, quantity. So now with two calculation groups, I still have the fundamentally three measures at the base, which is sum of sales, sum of quantity, and the number of orders measure. And then with the calculation groups, I can pick and choose what I want to see. And I'm also changing the relationship based on the calculation groups. Doesn't matter what measure I pick and choose, I am changing the relationship by the selection, or depending on if I don't want it to be on the selection, wherever I use this selected date, it's going to use the relationship because we given the logic in there. So it's already so powerful. Without writing multiple measures, we can really achieve already give the user the ability what they want to see, how they want to see, and they can pick and choose. And the one other advantage of all this is because the logic is in one single place. If tomorrow there is a need of the business logic change, we just need to go into one single place in the calculation item and make the change instead of going to the each measure and make the changes there. So it becomes really easy to manage and all this stuff. Let's take it to the next level. So we saw we switch the relationship, we can select the metrics. So let's see how we can also apply the time intelligence in mix of all this. Let's take a look at that. For time intelligence, I already created a calculation group to save the time. So let's look at that. Called it time intelligence, and that's the name of the calculation group, which will be a table in our model. And then the column name I called period, and then I put three calculation items in it, which will become three different records: month to date, quarter to date, and year to date. So what I did is month to date, simple again. There's a time intelligence function. I use dates, month to date. What I said is whatever the measure we are using in the model or in the visualization, use that measure. That's what the selected measure is all about, and apply my business logic. My business logic is calculate the dates month to date from calendar date. And similarly for QTD, I'm doing the same, and for the YTD, I'm doing the same. Now, I did this already, and now it does not matter what measure I'm using, whether quantity or order count, or in the future I add new measures. I just use this calculation group, and then it will calculate my month to date, quarter to date, and year to date if I the way I want it to be. Let's take a look at that. How would that work? So now, right now, what we're seeing is we are seeing the sales by order date, ship date, and a quantity by order date, ship date. Let's keep it simple, and we select only one. Let's say we have a sales by order date, and actually let's remove the date for a second. Now what I want is the time intelligence. So let's go to my time intelligence time intelligence, and then period. I'm going to bring it here just in the slicer to see. So we're not going to use it. So let's say we have a month to date, quarter date, year to date. So If I want to use this, I want my sales to be seen by month to date, quarter date, year to date. What I can simply do, I can use period on my uh, in my columns as a drill down option. So if I choose on the columns and drill down, so let it do that. So here you go. So what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing my month to date sales. Of course, month to date relevant is on the month to date. I'm not going to go into all time intelligence functions. I have a huge list of videos on my YouTube channel talking about time intelligence. So do check out that playlist. So we have a month to date for the sales, we have a quarter date and year to date. Now the question it comes down to what the month to we have three dates in our sales table, like which date it is choosing picking right now. Again, because we have made it so flexible, right now it is using the date what we have selected here. So we are using order date in this case. And if I really want to see my month to date by due date, I can simply switch and select due date, and what's going to happen is now my month to date calculation again doesn't, as you can see, this immediately change. My month to date, quarter date, year to date calculation is based on the due date. Does not matter whether I'm using the sales measure or the quantity measure. So let's select the month to date only. So I'm right now, if what I'm looking at, I'm looking my sales, month to date sales based on the due date. If I want my month to date to be, I want to see it by ship date, I can actually uh, select the ship date. Now I'm seeing my month to date by ship date. For quantity, I'm seeing month to date by ship date. So if I want quarter to date, I can switch what I want to see, and I can really now have the ability to see what I wanted to see, what date by what relationship I want to see, and what time intelligence function or the time intelligence period I want to see. Doesn't matter. In the future, there is a new measure. For example, I can simply add that measure in my selected metric. Let's say the discount comes, I go back to my calculation group, add a new selection called discount, and then that's it. All these selected date and the period would work. So this makes it super flexible. Already it is so flexible, I can really dive into my data the way I wanted it to be. It's so powerful already. So this is really powerful. We created three different calculation groups, like what measure you want to see, how you want to see, and changing the relationship. And on the time intelligence, we are reusing the same code. Month to date logic stays the same, and it does not matter what measure we are looking at, whether we're looking at quantity or orders or sales. The same month to date, quarter date, year to date logic is working on all those measures. But if tomorrow, let's say our fiscal period is currently is January to December, and tomorrow business changes their rules and the month to dates start from April to March, or some different things comes, we don't need to do anything. Or if we, or traditionally we have created multiple measures, what we can do now is we can go back to our calculation group, and whatever the logic needed to calculate month to date, quarter date, year to date, we can just apply that in this particular logic here, and it will apply to any of the measure used in the model. So this is super powerful. So this all looks amazing, and this is really great. And but a lot of great features come with a lot of responsibility as well, and you really have to think through when you're using and working with calculation groups. We already saw originally when we never gave the format string, we saw everything was showing as in a dollar sign, depending on what measure we put on the value section, and the format string of that measure was used even for quantity and for a number of orders. So that's the one first advice I have for you guys. When you are using calculation groups and you're returning some measures out of it, pay attention to the format string. That's really important, because you might see some funny numbers depending on what you end up using on the visualization. What measure you use, your format string could be totally different. So format string is the first thing, is the first pitfall. You have to be really careful that do define your format string when you're working with calculation groups. The second challenge here comes is let's take a simply create a measure. So let's say the ask is I want to show the title what a date I have selected, and in my what I'm seeing right now, whatever date is selected. Let's say if it's a single select, I want to show the title currently seeing the data by ship date, for example. So how we can do that is we can simply right now what we can do is we can add a measure. Let's add a new measure called title, and let's take a look how would that work. So if I go title measure, and we call it whatever the value selected in selected date, just return that using, let's say, selected value and then selected date measure our calculation group and that column. So we're saying is whatever is selected here, we are using that. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to do this, and let's bring this title measure put it in a card view here. Here you go. So this works perfectly fine. So at this point of time, this is working perfectly fine. If I switch to order date, it's working fine. I switch to due date, it's working fine. But I select, I just wanted to see the sales, and as soon as I select the sales, and now this returns blank. Now why it is doing that? Or if I don't select anything here, it's returning 30 million number. Where is what is this supposed to be? Where is this coming from? If I switch to quantity, it's giving me some 60,000 number. I'm actually going to remove period here for a second, just for the sake of demo. And if I see the number of orders, I'm seeing 28,000. Now immediately if you connect the dots, so whatever the measure we are selecting in our metric visual, it is giving us, if number of orders it's 27,000, it's returning 28,000. Of course it's using the auto unit. In the quantity 60,000 is using 60,000, and sales it's using 30 million. So this title measure which we just created, and it is using we set it to, we put the logic this that talk about that we're saying it's called using selected value this thing. But why it is returning these numbers? Where is this coming from? Again, this is one of the biggest pitfall when you're using power calculation groups. So basically what is happening is when we set the selected measure, we are forcing that when we are selecting any calculation item in selected metric, if we select sales, it should return the sum of sales, and that's what this measure is doing. It does not care about what measure you're using. It says this calculation group is forcing to return, or this calculation item is forcing to return the sales, and the other one's quantity and number of orders, and that's why we are seeing it. So how we should avoid that? So that's where other calculation group function come in the play. There's a selected measure name is selected measure. So let's say if we say if selected measure name, again as the name suggests, is equal to title measure, then just return the title measure, otherwise return sales. Again, just what we're trying to do here is when we are in our calculation item, we are saying if the selected measure name, because wherever the title measure is used, then just return that measure, otherwise return sales. So let's see if that fixes the problem. So let's apply these changes. And if here you go, so if we have selected the sales, now it's saying the using due date. So if I choose order date and the ship date, it's now doing what it's supposed to do. So this is working perfectly fine. Of course, in quantity, it would not work because we haven't applied that logic in the quantity. But the actual problem which I wanted to show here is when I put this logic, I said, if the selected Meyer name is title Meyer, then do this, otherwise do return sales. Let's say if I come back here and change the name of the Meyer something else, I say ABC Meyer. Now my logic is going to break, because what I said in my calculation group, in my logic here, is selected Meyer name. It's looking for the title Meyer, and now I rename the Meyer, which is very less likely you will do. But let's say if I renamed it, now it would not work. So that's the problem. So what's the solution for this, which is more scalable? You maybe want to use is selected Meyer. So what you want to do is selected Meyer is awesome title ABC Meyer, because that's what it's called. Then return, let's call it selected Meyer. We don't want, like, whatever the Meyer we are using, just use that, otherwise return sales. So we're saying if the selected Meyer on the visual is ABC Meyer, then return the selected Meyer, which will be ABC Meyer in this case, otherwise return sales. So let's apply this change and see what happens. So this is working perfectly fine. So using ship date, it's doing that, but it's the same thing previously, like selected Meyer name, but how it is different. So if I go back and change my ABC Meyer to something else, again, let's change it back to title ABC Meyer, it would still work. And previously when we renamed the Meyer, it fell apart, but now this is still working. The reason it is working, if we go back to our tabular editor, as you can see, it automatically changed the name of the Meyer in the is selected Meyer. So that's why this is working. So if we rename the Meyer, it actually looked into the Meyer name and it renamed it. And here you can define more Meyers as well. Like if I want title ABC, so basically whatever your exclusion list is, that you don't want the sales to be returned, you can put it in here. I can call it title XYZ, maybe some other Meyer, and then I can keep on growing this list. I actually did a video on this on my YouTube channel, like there are 5 different ways how you can exclude Meyers on which you don't want to apply the calculation groups. Do check out that video. I don't have a time to explain all that stuff, but again, the pitfall is on which Meyers you don't want to apply your logic or your calculation group, then you need to exclude those Meyers. And to exclude those Meyers, you have 2 ways: is selected Meyer or selected Meyer name. And selected Meyer name, the challenge is you are comparing 2 strings. In is selected Meyer, you are actually giving the Meyer name Meyer in there, and if the Meyer get renamed, it will take care of by itself. But the problem with the is selected Meyer is that it's not a scalable solution, because how many Meyers you will put in there. But let's say maybe you want to create some sort of a convention in your Meyer naming, that any Meyer on which you don't want to apply the calculation groups, you maybe want to start those calling exclude, exclude and then the name of the Meyer. So what you can do is you can do something like this: contains string, and my what does that means is selected Meyer name exclude. So what I'm telling here is, if my selected Meyer name contains the word exclude, then return that Meyer, whatever that Meyer is, otherwise return sales. So if I make this change, right now my title ABC Meyer will fall apart, because this is it does not exclude the word does not include the word exclude. So if I add exclude it next to it, this is gonna fix itself, right? Because we told that any Meyer name contains the exclude in the name of the Meyer, just don't apply the calculation group. So if tomorrow Again, this is somebody has to be really careful to when they're creating a new measure. If I create a new measure, and let's call it uh, let's title ABC, and I want to put some number, you are or some text, you are awesome. And if I use this measure in a visualization, in any visual, I call it title ABC. So if I put it in here and view it, I'm going to see the 30 million, because the logic, it does not include the word exclude, but as soon as I change it to exclude, it doesn't matter anywhere, exclude ABC, my measure is going to work immediately. So this is really you have to be very careful when you're working with calculation groups, that on which measures you don't want to apply your calculation items, or the logic what you're developing the calculation items and all that stuff. So is selected measure and selected measure name does help you to do that. But do check out my video where I given the 5 different ways how you can exclude measures from the calculation groups. And one more thing I wanted to show here is just the power of calculation groups. Let me actually show that in a quick demo here. Here is one other use case which I wanted to just walk through, that how calculation groups can be very powerful. I'm going to take you to another page here. Here I'm just showing the sales by country, order quantity and quantity. The same thing, we have 3 different measures, and the traditional way of doing things. So without calculation groups at this point in time, and assuming that the user has a need to showcase the trend of the sales or the order quantity or the quantity on the tooltip, right? We can create our custom tooltips. That's I'm not going to talk about the custom tooltips, but quickly here, what I did is I created a tooltip page, and where I have the year on x-axis and sales order quantity, order count and quantity on my y-axis, on my values basically. So if I connected that tooltip with this metrics visual, what happens here is when I hover over, I see how everything is trending for Germany, what the sales look like by year, and how all those things for each country look like. But the biggest drawback with this design is, like, when I'm hovering over the sales column, I'm seeing order count and the quantity as well. I don't want that. When I am on the sales, I want to see, like in this particular case, Canada sales by year on the trend line on my tooltip. And when I'm on an order count, I want to see the order count by year for the country on which I'm looking at the data. And this is where the calculation group will shine. We can simply do this. I can actually change my select a metric. Again, we're going to go back to what we did previously. So select a metric in my on my columns, and doesn't matter what we are using here, the same material, just any measure. So will this fix? And if I go here now, so it still doesn't working. I know why that is the case, because let's go to the tool. So I created the similar page as the tooltip. I call it tooltip calculation group. So here what I'm using is on my legend, I would use select a metric. So again, just quickly, I have a actually you should put a year on x-axis instead of month. So I have a year on x-axis, and then the sales, doesn't matter any measure, and then I used my calculation group selective metric on my legend. So how does that make a difference? Let's go back to the tooltip page, and switch our tooltip to for this visual to the new tooltip page. So quickly tooltips, and then instead of TT we use TTCG, which is tooltip calculation group. All right, so what's happening is now if I go to Germany, look what happens. We are seeing the sales for Germany over the year. It's not showing order count and the quantity. If I go to Canada, that's what I'm seeing. And if I go to quantity column, so immediately now I'm seeing the quantity by country over the time period, over the year, whatever I defined. So this calculation group, basically what is happening is we are passing the number of orders as a drill through to our tooltip page, and on whatever column we are at, we are seeing the value of that particular column over the period. And now it is passing Canada and number of orders as a filter to our tooltip page, and this is now much more cleaner look and what the user expected to see. Again, calculation groups are really powerful, and but again, as a couple of examples I showed, like you have to be really careful when you are working with calculation groups, because you can really get into some kind of challenges where your measures will start returning some funny numbers, and then you will not understand why that is happening. And one more thing, I don't have a time to explain that in here, the precedence, because if you're using multiple calculation group, what calculation group should run first and then the second and the third. The precedence of the calculation group is very important. And I'm gonna quickly switch back to the PowerPoint, and again we looked into the reusable calculations. We looked at change relationship, format string, how you can actually manage those, and how you can select and switch the measures what you want to see, and um, you can pick and choose. Again, there's resources to learn more. I put few amazing links here. The Microsoft website has a calculation groups. There's a good documentation around that. The SQL BI guys, of course, they are gurus when it comes to Power BI or anything related to DAX and Power BI related technologies. They have a lot of chapters on or the blog post on calculation groups. Do check out those blogs. And I also have a list of, I'm really passionate about calculation groups. I have tons of videos on my YouTube channel on calculation groups, and which talks about, a lot of those videos are talks about these different corner cases and some things which you can really achieve with calculation groups. Really powerful things you can do with calculation groups, but you have to really pay attention to the details. Do check out my youtube.com Peritas YouTube account, and check out the calculation group playlist and other time intelligence related and many other playlists on my YouTube channel. And again, I really appreciate all of you attending this session. I hope you learned few things about calculation groups and get a chance to explore how you can use calculation groups in your regular reporting needs. I would really appreciate if you scan this code and provide the feedback about the session, and just tell me where I can improve, what I could have done better, or what are the things you wanted to see. And one thing I wanted to say, do subscribe my YouTube channel. There's a lot of contents I'm posting in there, really interesting subjects I'm trying to cater through my YouTube channel and share my experience with the community. Once again, thanks for joining, and I really appreciate data platform team to give me the opportunity to talk and show and discuss all this with all of you. And looking forward to get your feedbacks and connect with all of you. And once again, thanks for watching, and thanks for attending. Thank you very much. Bye for now. Have a good day. Enjoy the summit. Thank you.